Greetings, Carl.
Well, hello, Michael Kitces. So good to see you.
It's good to see you. It's good to see you. How are you doing today?
Yeah, things are great. Yeah, really, really, really good. Our daughter just started med school. Day 4, calls me and says, I took the spine out of a cadaver. Day 4. And I was like, I don't need to know any more details, please. Thank you very much.
Wow.
I know. She said she learned more in the first 4 days than she had in, I think she said 4 years of anatomy class. So anyway, how about that?
There's nothing like getting to the point where you learn anatomy class because you literally start dissecting human cadavers. That'll do it.
I was like, so crazy. So anyway, that's the latest update.
Very cool. Very cool.
Yeah.
So what did you want to dig into today?
We've been holding these retreats at my house with 12, well, it's actually every one of them has been 12 advisors, and they come sort of with a puzzle they're trying to solve. And we quickly get, after all the tactics are out of the way, like we quickly get to this place where they're just scared to take the next step. And this could be about anything. This could be about, I want to write a book. I want to create a podcast. I want to start a new firm. I want to change the way I do my first meeting. Whatever it is, I want to spend more time with my family. Like there's all these, it doesn't really matter what it is. We get to like, okay, let's walk through the tactics. And then there's still this place where, look, I'm just scared.
Mm-hmm.
And I was asked today, like, what do you do? It comes up at these retreats. What do you do when you're just scared to take the next step?
Mm.
And so I wanted to walk you through this concept and just talk a bit about it. It's been incredibly helpful for me. And I started doing it. I don't even really know why. It was years and years ago. I started labeling things version 0. So like I would save like maybe a draft of the book or maybe I'd record a video for a course or something, and I would just label it version 0. And I was like, it feels so lightweight. Like it feels like, and it's different than rough draft, because rough draft implies nobody's ever going to see it. Version 0 was like, I'm going to just release this. So the story I was telling myself was, so I'll give you an example. We did this series of videos once, and it was going to be something where you paid a couple $100 and you got this series of videos. And I wasn't sure about the production quality, and I didn't know about the lights. And I was like, I was getting all up in my head. I was trying to find somebody to hire. And like, I need to get a guy over here to do the lights, and I need to buy a new camera. And I was doing all the things that we all do. And I was like, what if you just sat down and recorded version 0? And then, because you can always redo them. That's what I told myself. I was like, you can always, in fact, just plan on redoing them. We released them, and close to 2,000 people have gone through that experience. And we've never re-recorded them. Like we just never did, because they were fine. And so I wanted to just talk a little bit about this, the benefit of the idea of version 0, and how do you approach the same problem when you're like, I've got a thing, it's going to go out in the world. You've got lots of practice at it. I've had lots of practice at it. So it's not quite as scary as it used to be, but it still is scary. So how do you think about when something's good enough to get out there, and how could version 0 be helpful for you?
So I have a lot of resonance to this like model, this framework that you're putting forth. Although I think about it slightly differently, or I did it in 2,000 people. I came, like, it freaks me out a little, because to me, the whole context of these, like, I'm afraid I'm going to go do it, and then it's going to suck, and everybody's going to see that it sucks, and then I'll be all embarrassed that it was sucky. And right, I mean, like, that's usually a version where the fear comes from. Why I don't want to, where I write the book or change up what I do with my clients, or whatever the thing is. And so there are a few things that are running through my head. One, there is this model out there that I ultimately think of as a model around personal accountability to follow through, which is something the effect of, if you want to build something, build in public. Because once you've committed to do it publicly, basically like the sheer mortification means the sheer mortification of saying you're going to do it publicly and then not following through on it is so horrific that a lot of the times if we just commit to do something that we build in public, then like everybody's gonna we're gonna get it done because we don't want to like flip flop and go back on our word after we started the thing publicly. And I want to knock the let's say like build in public movement. I don't know that it's a movement, but just I see a lot of people follow the approach like if it works for you, it works for you. Kudos to you. I actually struggle with that mightily. Not unlike the maybe the context what you're talking about, or what happens when you launch an initial version 0, which is when you launch it at the beginning, the truth is nobody notices, nobody knows,
Yeah,
basically
right.
nobody cares.
Right. Nobody sees it.
Yeah, I think back to the early days when I was launching our blog platform and our newsletter. Nobody was reading it. In fact, originally Nerd's Eye View was a blog that launched in 2008 and I felt like nobody was reading it. So I installed Google Analytics, actually proved that no one was reading it. So I shut it down for like 2 years because I couldn't figure out how to get anybody to actually notice the thing that I was doing, right? Like the fear was I'm going to write and I'm not going to be that good at it and everyone's going to criticize me. And then I actually wrote and it turned out literally not a soul realized that I was doing this and the traffic and readership was non-existent. So then I shut it down because I said, well, it's not even worth the time and trouble to do it because no one's seeing it.
Right.
But I mean, there's a phenomenon to me. It's sort of a version of, I think just what happens for a lot of us where, we're afraid to do a lot of things in public because I don't want to seem as awkward. I don't want to be embarrassed. A lot of us put this on ourselves as teenagers. Some of us, like me, carry it for our entire lives. And, the truth for almost all of it is, no one is looking at you as much as you think everyone is looking at you when you're all embarrassed about whatever that social situation is. And then it happens anyways, and then nobody notices the thing. Not that many people are looking. And so to me, I guess an indirect version of what you're expressing, what I found is most of us, unless you go through the trouble of consciously trying to build in public and like putting out there, like you're making the thing, everybody look at me while I make the thing. And then you have to go like, oh my goodness, I hope it really turns out to be good now that I like made this big audience around myself. Right. Most of the time that you try stuff and you launch stuff and you put it out there, almost no one is noticing, right? Remember how hard it was to get your first few clients? That's because when you launched your firm, the problem wasn't that you weren't that good yet. The problem was literally no one noticed.
Right.
Because they're just busy with their own lives and they're not checking out what you're doing all day long. That's why we have to market our backsides off in the first couple of years, trying to get anybody to work with us.
Yeah.
Because nobody's really looking until you make them look. That's why we have to market and sell and do the things that we do. So the starting step to me, I guess in the purest sense, is just like take it down a notch. Not that many people are looking. In fact, you probably have to work hard to get anybody to notice the thing that you're doing or creating or building in the first place. So just put something out there. Hardly anyone besides maybe your parents and your siblings and a couple of really close friends are likely to notice anyways, because you ask them to look and give you some feedback. And that's all you need to start the process of getting something out there and getting a little bit of feedback. And if it turns out good, sell it to the next 2,000 people or the next 1,997 people after the first 3 that get version 0. But if it turns out it's good, you can sell it to the next 1,997 people. And if it turns out it's not good, no one but the first 3 are ever going to know. And 3's not that many.
Yeah. So do you view that? I've talked a lot about this exact idea, right? Like I always say, my mom and my sister were the only ones that were reading Behavior Gap. And that was actually true for a long time. I found
my dad and my study group were the only people who were
the
original.
I found Seth Godin's website traffic chart once. I've since tried to find it again. I just can't find it. But it was nothing for a very long time.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So it's nobody escapes this I shouldn't say nobody, virtually nobody escapes this idea that at first nobody's paying attention.
Right. Yeah. It's
And
the
you're
whole,
painting that as
the
good
overnight
news.
successes take 15 years and no one sees
Yeah.
how sucky they are for the first 10.
Yeah. So you're painting that as good news.
Yeah. I mean, if you're going to have some anxiety about what you're putting out there and you don't want to be embarrassed, like good news,
Don't
hardly
worry,
anyone's
nobody
going to
knows.
notice anyways. And if it turns out to be good, you might get some word of mouth and then a few people actually will show up. And at that point, that's fine.
And I think the other way to view that too is that as you get better, because if you keep doing it, because there can be sometimes I've had people get unmotivated by that. They're like, well, then what's the point? And so I think there's two things to say about what's the point. Number one, if I think you can create these projects, whatever it is, content creation, relationships, like whatever it is, you can create these projects that the benefits to you, like for instance, writing a daily blog. I remember Seth saying he didn't care if anybody read it because it was metacognition. Like the benefit to him, my daily behavior up radio I do every day. I did episode 1129 today.
Wow.
I do it every weekday, or I release it every weekday. Sometimes I batch the recordings, but I release it every weekday. The benefits to me. And so if you do the project in a way that's number one. Number two is that as you keep doing it, the only way to get to the exciting part of the attention curve, it's just like the compound interest curve. There's no way. We're all looking for shortcuts to get to the exciting part. There's no shortcut. You've got to go through the boring part. The good news is you can map over that same attention curve. You can map quality. That as this thing catches on, as more people know about the quality of your work, as more people know about the quality of your writing, whatever the project is, don't over-index on a content creation thing just because we use those examples. But whatever that is, you're getting better at it. And as more people show up, good news, you're a little better. And I think that's another way to view that. And I'm just trying, version 0 is just purely an attempt to remove some of that pressure. Like it was funny in the conversation we had earlier about version 0 in the workshop. I was like, I was saying, like, the voice I say to myself is, hey bro, it's just version 0. Like, relax. It's just version 0. If you need to, which is implying to me, like, I could go back and redo it.
Yep.
Right. And what's interesting is I almost never have to, because it ends up being good enough. One last story, Ramit, I remember I was walking on a walk with Ramit Sethi in New York. Geez, man, must have been a decade ago now. And one of the things I always loved about Ramit, I mean, there's lots of, like, look, we can all have bones to pick about some of the things Ramit says about advisors and whatever, but you can't fault the quality of his business and the work he does and the energy he puts in, and he's trying to change people's lives, and he's probably changed a lot of people's lives. I remember saying to him, one of the things I love about your content is the production quality. And he just laughed and said, you are the first person to ever say that. He's like, nobody actually cares. Now, I think that's not entirely true. People do care. You just don't hear about it very often. I mean, you hear about it if it's bad. You just don't hear about it if it's good.
Yeah, I think of it as a hygiene factor. If it's bad, you really notice, but you don't really get more credit because it's good.
Yeah, I think that's true. But his point is, it's so often the place to hide. This has got to be good. The content, the production's got to be good. My advice has got to be good. I can't handle new clients. I've got to be good. No, you just get in and start doing the work, and that's how you become good.
So one other thought I've got on this from my end, I want to turn a couple of questions back to you. The corollary that I find to this, so I guess your comment, like, you put forth a lot of version 0s and then you just, like, it turned out they were fine. You didn't have to change them. Yeah. I find my version 0s often get revamped. It does not work the way I expected or as well as I expected. From my end, like, good news, not very many people actually saw it because I was just kind of putting it out there as an experiment to see what kind of uptake or traction would get. Hardly anyone saw it. If they like it, more will share it. If they don't, I just get to say, like, you just kind of walk that back and work on that a little bit more. But what I found in that process is that uh, you know, I'm a pretty good judge of sort of generally what I think would be of interest, whether that's like content we create in the platform context, services and stuff that we've rolled out to clients over the years.
Mhm.
And I'm not, I feel like almost no one is, having like lived the various versions of the entrepreneurial journey. No one's very good at masterminding exactly what the end client wants. So as
Hmm.
I think of like, if you think of it on like a spectrum of, from zero completely wrong to 100% completely perfect of what the client wants, we might be pretty good at the first 80%.
Hmm.
Almost no one is any good at the last 20%,
Mhm.
because what we do, what almost all of us do as entrepreneurs and business owners, we build what we would want.
Right. Right.
Well, I wouldn't buy it if it wasn't this or that, or have this or attach that or include this offering or whatever it is. And so we basically build for ourselves, then we go and see whether anybody else wants to buy it. And the reality is, most of us underestimate a little bit how wonderfully unique and special we are. And it turns out people might kind of like what you like, but almost never exactly the way that you like it.
Yeah.
And so the
Yeah.
other reason why I'm a fan of this framework, if you in the entrepreneurial context, this is often the like lean startup, minimum viable
Sure.
product approach. If you read folks like Eric Ries, is just, I believe this is as many, like businesses and things I've launched that have been successful over the years. I am routinely amazed at things we do that do not go nearly as well as I thought. Maybe they do okay, maybe they even flop, and I like really thought it was going to be a sure hit. And then this other thing we do that's just like, oh, I think it would be helpful to the people we serve. We put it out there. It's like, that's what you guys get all excited about. Like, that's the
Yeah.
thing.
Yeah.
Uh, okay,
Yep.
I stand corrected.
Yep.
And one of the
Yep.
hardest things was just getting over this idea of, I don't actually have to figure all of it out. I just got to get reasonably close, and then put version zero, to use your term, and then put version zero out of the marketplace, and let clients tell me if they actually like it or what they would like differently. Because there comes a point where
Totally.
if I keep iterating on it,
Yeah.
I'm
Yeah.
past the, is it good enough to figure out whether anyone likes it? And I'm just making it better for me.
Yeah.
And that really only helps me and not anybody else that I'm trying to actually serve.
Totally. Can I comment on that for a minute?
Yeah, please.
This is such a universal principle. I wrote one of the Times columns was about this. It was called "You're Fired," and
You're
I actually,
fired.
yeah, and I actually did it in this exact workshop I was referencing when this conversation came up. It was an advisor who had started a podcast, and she was trying to release season 2, but she'd been, working on season 2 for like 3 months. And she was like, I think I'm finally ready to release it. How do I know? And then let me just tell you one more story. I was at a songwriters workshop this weekend, and Nathaniel Rateliff, who's become like a thing, he talked about like his song that's just been a runaway hit, SOB, was, he's like, I don't even know if I like it. Like, it's a very real song. It's a very real song. He's like, I love but he's like, he's like, but you better believe, like, I got it out there, and I refer to that as tailwind. I may not be very good at knowing exactly which way the wind is blowing, but once I notice a tailwind,
Mm-hmm.
I'm pretty good at noticing, like, wow, this is this, and the tailwind often shows up in the form of energy and people. So like you do a thing. And so the advisor that was trying to decide to release a podcast, I explained to her, like, you're fired from the job of deciding if it's ready or not.
Yeah.
Because think about, like, you are literally the worst person on the planet to have that job, to decide if your own work
Right.
is good, to decide if people are going to find your work valuable. You're the worst person. Nathaniel Rateliff is the worst person. Now, there's a fine line here, and you pointed to minimum viable product. There's a fine line between like caring about your craft And figuring out the boundary conditions of these two, of like just release it, version 0, minimum viable product, ship it, and care about the craft. Stop putting crap out in the world. Like the boundary conditions of those two, like where the line is, I don't know. I think it's for all of us to determine. That's called art. But I think we do over index. And I think it's really helpful to fire yourself. Like pack your bags and get out. Like your job is not to decide whether it's good enough. Your job is to create it to some standard. And I would argue lower those standards. Like lower the standards a little bit, some standard, get it out there, and then react and decide whether you like the feedback and want to change it or whether you want to make it true. That's the other thing I think people spend too much time on, is like trying to find the truth versus making something true. Like, I don't think Steve Jobs spent, to use a way cliche example, sorry for even bringing it up, but I don't think he spent much time trying to find the truth about what people wanted in a music player. I think or in a phone, because now we're at the point where a lot of people, not only will you not remember the radio, you won't remember the record, you won't remember the 8-track, you won't remember the CD, you may not even remember the iPod. But I don't think he spent a lot of time deciding whether people wanted a flywheel to figure out how to listen. I think he made it true. And so I think, but those lines are very interesting. There's no sharp line. So I love just firing myself. Like, wait, your job is to create stuff up to the standard, that just lower that standard, create it, put it in the world. Because especially for this audience, right? The people need what you're talking about, whether it's a better first meeting or a short book or a podcast, people need it. And if you're going to, it's not going to do anybody any good sitting on the shelf.
So I don't know if I'm like reading into your earlier examples too literally. So like, call me on it if this isn't good to call back. But I'm struck when you were talking at the beginning about the retreats that you were holding and the kinds of challenges where advisors were coming out. You know, we ask about the tactics, and then you get the tactics, and then you still can't do it because it becomes clear it's not actually the tactics. Like we're just sort of scared to take the next step. And so you had given some examples. I think some was like, you know, I want to write a book, or like try changing up my meetings. But you had some like start a new firm, spend more time with my family. Like, are there version 0 steps?
Yeah.
For this, or are we talking about something that's really
No,
mostly a content?
no, it's a great
creation
question.
style?
And it's really, really important to understand this. This is something I'm not very good at a lot of things, but one thing I've worked really hard at trying to be good at is, I call it experiment design. And it's really like designing version 0s. And for everything, it's like, look, I would like to have a little bit of better relationship with, let's say that you'd like to have a little bit better relationship with your son. Well, okay. Well, we could go on a trip, or we could talk every week, or I could write him a letter every day. I could email, like, that's 0 to 1,000. What's 0 to 1, to use another tech term, right? What's version 0 of that? What's the smallest example? I think I want to retire with 5 million on a sailboat, to use a different example with clients. Like, clients come in, they've got these ideas.
It's like
5 million in a sail, 55, all fives, 55, 5 million in a 55-foot sailboat. It's a big sailboat. Have you been on a boat before? like what's version 0 of that? Like, what if we just went out for an hour? And I think the reason it's so much more fun to think about version 200, you know, going 0 to 1,000, because this comes up in business scale. The more I can think about scale, the less I actually have to do anything. And so I think putting yourself on the hook for the next smallest step, David White calls it the step close in, the step you don't want to take. David White, the Irish poet. And I think that gets really scary because it's super intimate. It's the very next step. It's not step number 2. It's not step number 3. It's often really simple. And anytime anything's really simple, again, from one of David White's poems, it's easy to let other people smother it. And so I think this applies to the work we do with clients. It applies to relationships. Like, what's the smallest I find myself doing this all the time. Whoa, whoa, like with my kids, my adult kids, all the time. And they do it to me too. Like, wait, you're thinking, let's back up. What's the next smallest step? So I think it applies to everything. And there's some really great research, decision-making framework, all the stuff around complexity theory, complex adaptive systems, how to navigate conditions of irreducible uncertainty. All of them point back to the same thing: solve for the next local optimum. What's the next
Well,
smallest step? So BJ Fogg's work on tiny habits, all that stuff.
there's an irony to me in this, just as I think about it. Like to me, it takes me back to the scary place.
Why?
The,
Tell me why.
the big step with the big goal is risky, which makes it easy to justify why I'm not going to do it, because
Oh, interesting.
risky.
Yeah.
There's no stinking excuse for taking this. What would you say? The small step close in, like
Yeah. Yeah.
it's not that hard. Like, I'm gonna have to really,
Yeah.
if you make me do that, I'm gonna have to actually do this.
Yeah, let me just real
Big
quickly.
sigh. Oh.
That's super smart. Often people talk about like this the big step not being quite as scary because if it fails, there's a million other things to blame, right? Like there's all these big other variables. The next smallest
Yes.
step, there's only one thing. Like for instance, I
Yeah.
really my, let's just pretend like you have a strained relationship with your mother or your father, and you're thinking about like therapy and all. Like, how scary is it if somebody says to you, pick up the phone? You know what I mean? Like, call. I mean, that gets so intimate so quick. Like, I
Yeah.
could feel that. Like, so quick. Like,
Well, it just
what?
gets right. It gets really real all of a sudden. Like,
Yeah.
I can plan all the
Yeah.
stuff that I may or may not do or have an excuse to talk out of, but well, if I just do that, then like she might actually pick up the phone, and now we're talking again for
Yeah.
the
And you
first
just
time.
like,
And
what are you going to talk? Well, how's the weather? And then hang up. Like 5 minutes. Just pick up the phone. 5 minutes, 3 minutes. Just
you haven't
check.
talked in years, it can't really be worse.
Yeah, and that's the other crazy thing is that the more of that becomes these big walls that are built between us and the thing we want to do, and the more bricks you put on the wall, the harder it is to do. And the reality is the action is almost always micro scary, micro small, micro action. Pick up the phone, like just to use an example. So I think you're right. And yeah, the idea of it being really risky. I hadn't actually thought about that idea that like, okay, the big thing's really risky, so therefore I can justify not doing it. I got to do more research. I got to think more. I got to build
Yeah,
more spreadsheets. I got to Kitces it to death. We've started using you as a verb around here.
cool. Not the way I would have envisioned it, but sure, we'll roll with it. Uh, uh but I think for me, right, so ultimately that kind of comes down to, right, it's some version of fear of failure, right? At least as I interpret, like the small step is scarier because I really have to actually do it. There's not much of an excuse not to. And as you pointed out, the only one to blame on a failed small step is me. So now like fear of failure is like right there in front of my face.
Yeah.
Which to me at least comes back to, and this is why, at least for me, I'm not particularly a fan of building in public. Like, I'm going to build with
Interesting.
my really small experiment over here. And you know what? If it fails, there's like 3 people who are ever going to see it and know. And
Yeah.
if it
Well,
works, then we'll continue. We'll take the next step. Maybe it gets bigger. Maybe it gets amplified. Right? I'll
but
try.
that's no longer, Michael. I want to ask you a question because I'm curious. That's no longer true for you, not the scary part, but the part where you said almost nobody will see it. Now people will see it. How has it changed for you? Like you're still building, you're still doing things more than ever. How have you dealt with the idea that now lots of people will see it when you do it?
So I'd
Has the
answer it
fear
two
gone away?
ways. One, no, fear doesn't go away.
Yeah, important.
Uh, I think so in some cases, I'm still pretty good at figuring out smaller stakes experiments and ways to
Mm.
try things before I do
Mm.
the bigger version that, may be scarier and or, more visible failure. There was a point for years when I was thinking about businesses that I might want to launch. I would do articles about them on the blog, just like about the topic.
Mm. Mm.
Because I'm not launching a whole business, taking on business partners, putting capital at risk. I'm like, I wrote an article about the thing. And you know what? If a zillion people click on the thing, then maybe there's
Interesting.
actual real interest and need. Like we launched FP Pathfinder to put flowcharts and checklists out there for financial advisors because I wrote an article on flowcharts and checklists, and it was one of our top 3 trafficked articles for the year. When I wrote it, I went like, oh my gosh, there's actually a lot of interest in this. Like, I didn't go
Yeah.
launch a business and create a product and pricing and marketing and do all the stuff it takes to launch and then go like, I really hope this is going to work. I spent a few hours. I wrote an article about, how I thought
Yeah.
it was strange that Atul Gawande did his book about checklists for doctors and pilots, and we don't have any as financial advisors. And isn't that kind of weird? Maybe we should too.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right. So I had a small version to do. I mean, yes, it was visible as an article, but I didn't like visibly entrepreneur
Right.
myself to say I'm launching a business. I hope this one works. Like I found a really small
Small way.
scale example version of it. That was my relative to a business. That was a version 0.
Exactly right.
And
That's
when it
exactly what
worked
matters.
out, okay, then and only then did I take the next step. So, if someone wants to have fun, like look through the blog archives, you can try to figure out how many businesses I've thought about that didn't turn out to businesses because not very many people clicked on the article either. And I took that as
Yeah.
a sign.
Yeah, in the literature, and I think Jennifer Garvey Berger first pointed me to this, is you'd call that, instead of thinking fail safe, thinking safe to fail. So instead of designing fail safe experiments, design safe to fail experiments. And so all you were doing there was like, it was totally safe to fail if the article, and nobody would even know, but
Right.
nobody would even define it as failure. It would just be,
Right.
oh, not very many people read that.
Yep.
Right? Super, super smart. And you could apply that exact same thing to client relationships, to like, instead of going on a cruise with your family that you haven't seen for 2 months, maybe you should call them.
Yeah.
Like, and again, the cruise with your family you haven't seen for 2 months or 2 years is starting the business with capital partners.
Yep.
Calling them is writing the blog post. Right. And so I just think if you can always pull it back, pull it back, pull it back. Like, what's the small David White? It's called Start Close In. And that first, like, take the first step, not the second, not the third. And there's the bottom of the first stanza says something, the step that you don't want to take. Right. That to me is, we're just trying to operationalize that idea through really good experiment design.
Very cool. Well, thank you,
Yeah.
Carl. Appreciate the
Cheers,
discussion.
Michael.
Went to
Super
interesting
fun.
places. Thank you.
Yep.